here I am again. Back to the if it ain't broke, don't fix it routine. I guess about my first example of that kind of problem was when Mary, big deal pa to bring her bike down with us to Grandma Warner's on the farm. And I had been watching cousin Donald and his buddy Ivan Murray and different ones when they had come over and borrow pa's tools to take the wheels off the bicycles and clean them up and grease the bearings and so forth. And so anyway, when we're on the farm there and I found this can of grease, I decided that Mary's wheel bearings should be greased. And so I proceeded to take the front wheel off. And I got it off, and we were by the back steps on Grandma's laundry porch. And I had the bike upside down, and I got the wheel off, and I proceeded to unscrew the nut that would hold the bearing cone. And so, of course, when I hadn't realized that if you take one side off, you let the shaft go, the other side drops. And so, anyway, in the process, I proceeded to drop the bearings out of these front cone and bearing assemblies, and they didn't have cages on them. They were just loose ball bearings. They were held in there by the race and the cone. And so, of course, they dropped down on the ground, and when I started looking for them, I didn't find them all. And the end result was that I was missing some bearings out of it, and so that sort of spoiled that project. I had to going to wait till somebody was going to town and find a store that would sell bearings, and as it turned out, that was a problem because they didn't have that kind of bearings in the hardware store. The newer kind had a bearing cone and a cage, and so anyway, I bought them, and I guess it worked, but I felt sick for about a year about that situation. If I'd have left the thing alone, it probably would have went for years without any new grease. Of course, with Mary's bike on the farm, actually, she wasn't all that crazy about bicycling in the first place, so she let me ride it most all the time that I wanted. And I know one time I rode into Blue Earth from the farm, and it was only 3 miles, so it was no real big deal, but I had gone in to visit Aunt Alta, and then I guess for some reason or other I was going to go downtown to I don't know, get her maybe a loaf of bread or something. I can't remember what it was, but what I do remember is that that bike didn't have a chain guard on it, and so you had to be careful or you get your pants leg caught in the chain. Well, so I roll up my pants leg. in this particular case, that time I'd had my pants rolled up, but they were a little on the long side to begin with, so the cuff roll was so fat that it somehow sagged over, and I got it caught in the chain, and it got caught so bad that it was locked up, and there I was, sitting a couple blocks up from Aunt Elta's on Main Street on the sidewalk, trying to get my cuff out of my chain, and it was. I know I spent about a half an hour, and of course pants were all black, and it was a real mess. One of the early days when we first moved in on the Polk Street place, I joined the Knutson and the Broughton, and I don't know who else was there, but anyway, the kids had a thing going in the Knutson garage. When the Knutsons, evidently if I remember right, they didn't have their car in there yet. They'd piled a bunch of furniture and stuff like that in there, and so anyway, one of the things that was going on was smoking. Old Pete Knutson was he was into smoking, and when I say old Pete Knutson, actually he was a couple of years older than I was, and but anyway, old man Knutson would buy cigarettes, and a lot of times Pete would have to go to the store for groceries, and they had cigarettes on the bill, on the list. Pete would sometimes change it from 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes, and then he'd take a pack. And well, anyway, he was into smoking, and this one particular day, when I got away from the house a little bit, when Ma was taking a rest or something, and I got over with the Knutson kids, and they, in their garage, they had been smoking, but they didn't have any more cigarettes, and but they had some cigarette wrapping paper, and they got into rolling up some stuffing out of the furniture pillows, and rolling that up in this cigarette paper and smoking that. And so anyway, it just happens that each one of us would take a wad of that stuffing, and put it in our pocket, and then when it was our turn to roll make a cigarette out of it with that wrappers, cigarette papers. Well, about the time before it was my turn, my ma started yelling for me, and I, of course, when she yelled, you hear her for a block away, so I had to go running. And when you know, I run home, and what does she want? She wants me to go to the store for her. And she, for some reason, she had a note of a list of what she wanted, and for some reason or other, she'd never done it before. She grabbed my pocket to put the slip in my pocket, and she of course, discovers this wad of stuff. She pulls it out. She says, "What's this for? Smoking?" Right out of the clear blue sky. And of course, she's caught me cold. Yeah. Oh, talk about luck. Anyway, that stopped my smoking before I ever got started. Although I guess I did get started smoking a little bit a couple of years later. We got into building shacks in the vacant lots. The kids would build huts or shacks or something, and so the Knudsen clan had built a shack in the lot next to us, and they dug out a little bit, and then they had found a piece of tin or something, and anyway, they had improvised a shack that wasn't all that great. Well, Darrell Broughton and I just decided to build one too. Only we built a pretty good one. We squared it off and dug down far enough so that it went down 3 feet, and then hammered in some I think it was chunks of 2x4 and for the corner posts, and then boxed it in and rigged a little doorway on it so we could climb through the door and get down underneath, and rigged a little fireplace with a chimney, and so I had it pretty neat. The only thing was, about the second time we tried to use it, we were going to cook a couple of potatoes on that in that fireplace, and Ma had been gone shopping, I suppose, or something. And she was gone with the car, but when she got home, for something different, she walks over and she puts a lid on that doggone stovepipe going up, and of course, the smoke is out of there right now, and we come out coughing, and we were mad her heck about that, but she got a big kick out of it. And then one of the other things, right in front of the fireplace, I rigged a little box and had it kind of covered over with mud, and in that box is where we had big deal some cigarettes, and so that was when we were going to start smoking. We could smoke in that in the shack, but of course after we pulled that off one day, I guess, and the next time they got a chance to get down there, opened the box up, and the cigarettes were all gone. And so that was when I got madder than hell at Darrell, because I knew he was the only guy that knew about that secret compartment. And so I gave him hell. I didn't beat him up, but I was tempted to. But anyway, it didn't take long, and the old Tunsky come along and bought those 2 vacant lots, and he's going to build a house, and so our shacks didn't last all that long. But he was real shook about, or not shook, but he understood the shacks there, but he had quite a time with that shack that Darrell and I built, that the thing didn't fall apart like he thought it would when they went to dig it out. They had a little trouble getting that thing apart. Of course, they didn't exactly have a bulldozer. They had a guy with a team of horses and a scoop bucket, that would for scooping out the dirt for that basement, and so that guy put a lot of hours in digging out that basement. And then, of course, when Tunsky was laying blocks, I made a few nickels off of him, helping him lay blocks for his basement. And of course, all I did was carry the blocks over to him while he was mudding them in with mortar and concrete stuff, I guess I got my first sales experience with Pete Knutson on his paper route. Pete was peddling papers in the area all the way from went all the way over to Hayes Street from I think it was from Reservoir Boulevard and on up to went all the way to 45th, and so it was one hell of a big stretch. Of course, there wasn't a lot of papers though, but the area was that was a long ways, and I can remember some of the houses that were being built on 37th Avenue, and then on Hayes Street, across from the Earth Springers, a guy was building a house, and I remember he was kind of a kook. He wouldn't say yes and he wouldn't say no about buying a newspaper, and so every day we go by, we'd stop and see if he changed his mind yet about buying a paper. And I don't remember if he ever did buy one, but that was a big challenge. And but we did sell a subscription a couple of times, and I know it was every time a new subscription was worth 25 cents to as far as a bonus from the paper company, Star Journal. And so anyway, Pete would give me a nickel every time I would help him peddle papers, and then if we sold something out of the 2 bits, I'd get a dime. And I think I only once or twice maybe I got a dimes on that deal. Back in the Depression days, the dimes were awful hard to come by. But anyway, when the end result was that after I don't know, maybe a year or so, a year or two, they split up the routes and changed them around, and so they were in need of carriers again, and so I ended up getting a paper out of my own, which involved a route from on the other side of his route, which meant from the one I got was from Reservoir Boulevard over to Central, all the way from 36th and Central to 43rd and Central, and then involving the in-between streets like Gould Avenue and 40th Avenue, 41st and 42nd, and so I had 130 some customers, and so I had my hands full with that route, and that wasn't so bad. But to get the route, I had to buy it, you might say, because I had to put down $30 as bond money, I suppose, so I wouldn't run off with the collections. And that was another thing, worse than peddling papers. I had to collect for the damn things. And it was bad enough that first I was collecting once a month, but by the time when they changed the routes and that, by the time I got a route, it was collect every 2 weeks. So I spent half the time peddling the papers and the other half trying to collect the money for them. And if the company got their money, then and if people ran out or didn't pay, it was my tough luck. And so it, I had to learn how to be a kind of a hard-nosed businessman at times. Of course, I did have some very nice customers, like Earl Bakken, for instance. The Bakkens lived on Gould Avenue, and Earl Bakken ended up going in with another guy, and they developed, that pacemaker for Medtronics, and old Earl is a multimillionaire now. But anyway, when he was young, he was a nice guy. He had been going to college when I was peddling papers there, and as a matter of fact, he was still going to college, and at the university, and his folks were the ones that were buying the paper. But Earl would come and go, so I'd see him occasionally, and then later years he got married and lived on 37th Avenue, not far down from Sullivan's gas station, so he was a customer at the gas station where I worked too. And once again, they traded there, and they were nice people. But there was a teacher like Oscar Ing, and the president of the bank, old Woodward, and Judge Johnson, and Nelson, the high school principal, and or superintendent, I guess he was, the superintendent of schools, Nelson. And anyway, these people were among the nicer ones, and they treated me very nicely too. But there's always a few of them in the list that I wasn't real crazy about. But then when I heard that the boys were getting work over at the chicken farm, old H.O. Johnson, his name was Helmer Odin Johnson, but him and his wife, and he had a couple of spinster daughters that ran this, we call it a chicken farm, on 43rd, just below the hill, down the hill from Reservoir. anyway, they had the farm, and the women, when they were into cats, they had pedigreed, prize-winning cats that they were into breeding and selling and so forth. But anyhow, they end up hiring me, and along with Pachaki and Daune Albro and I guess Joe Matasovic and one or two of the other boys over there work for him at times too. But what it amounted to was mostly cleaning eggs somewhat, but mostly cartoning the eggs, making cartons. These carton deals would come in. They'd have to go through this machine that would organize them so that they would have be ready to put the eggs in, and they would fill them cartons and then put them in cases. Each case held 30 dozen eggs, and then we'd stack them in the cooler room, and then we would help deliver them. It'd take the Aryan Cafe would usually take a couple of cases of medium-sized eggs every week, and then Hove's grocery store, they had their special packages, and they would probably take probably 12 cases at a time, and I'm not sure whether they got those 12 cases once or twice a week, but anyway, there was other stores too that would take a number of cases every week, and so the whole works involved old H.O. going out on I don't know, probably Monday morning. He'd probably go out to the farm district and collect up buy eggs from the farmers, as well as of course he had his own chickens that were laying eggs also. But I think most of the eggs came from the farmers around, and they would have to be checked, candled. Would have to candle the eggs, make sure they were clear and clean, and then we'd box them up and get them ready for the shipping to the stores again. And then, of course, some of the work involved cleaning out the hen houses and so forth. I didn't get in on that, though. But most of the time, the other boys were involved with cleaning out the hen houses, and then they would process the chickens and sell them for roasting chickens or something like that, fryers or whatever. But I didn't get in on that. The women would have a crew of their own group that would do most of the candling and most of the chicken work, cleaning them and processing them, and so that was another phase of the operation. But I worked for them for a couple of years. One of the problems they had around there was rats, and so on weekends when we weren't work, and oftentimes we'd bring our 22s down and sandbag for the rat holes and wait till they come out and then nail them, and Johnson would give us I think it was a dime a piece for those rats. But that also led to a real problem. I ended up with Jock and I, and of course Darrell Broughton. He didn't work for him, but Darrell would tag along with me wherever I went sometimes. And anyway, he was tagging along on our rat hunt one Saturday, and we were down at in the buildings. And we ran out of rats to shoot, so we walked outside back there and see if there's any birds around, and so this one tree had one or two sparrows or something up there, and so Pachak, him and I both going to pick off that bird, and he shot, and the birds were gone, and so I didn't shoot, but I had that old single shot Stevens. I had it cocked, and I didn't know that when you lift the bolt on the thing while it was cocked, that it would go off, and because most of the time when I cocked the thing, I would shoot it, and so in this case, there was nothing to shoot, so we decided, well, we'll amble around and do something else, and so we were walking down the hill a little bit, and I stopped and going to unload my gun, and Darrell stepped up beside me, and the gun was aiming crosswise to my left, and when I lifted the bolt, the thing went off, and the bullet went right through his leg. And so he spent some time in the hospital with that, and that was a big deal bummer. They didn't realize that the bullet had nicked an artery, and even though it wasn't bleeding, it was very thin, and so when old Doc Blumenthal told him to exercise his leg all he could. Well, the more he exercised, the more that ballooned, and pretty soon it burst, and he had a busted artery in his leg, and then that was a real problem. And so anyway, without any insurance or anything like that, it cost the old man some dough, and that was a real bummer that I got into on that mess. I guess you can say I've shot most every kind of animal, including people. And then one of the other things I bought for guns was a 16 gauge shotgun that Uncle Bruno had that he wasn't using anymore, and actually it was kind of a neat gun. Like I say, it was a single shot 16 gauge, and really it was very effective. You only got one shot, but so you had to make it good. But hey, that way you get good. And so pheasant hunting was a real big deal. I think my gang, when we got into pheasant hunting, that was some of the best hunting trips that we ever had for fun of a lot of shooting and a lot of good eating birds. I guess from the time in the chicken farm and that, about this time, I decided to go to work for something different. They were advertising for help all over the place, and the war was breaking out and that, and so I decided to check this payroll company downtown that was a dietary food store that was advertising for part-time help, and school was going to start up and so forth. So I checked into that, and I found that I could take a streetcar after school and get down there and work for a couple hours, and they checked that out. But as it turned out, it was after a couple of weeks down there, I got kind of fed up with that kind of work too, and by the time I spent my money on a streetcar coming and going, and all that time and effort, that didn't look too great, because I found that I could get a job ushering in the Heights Theater that, of course, was close by, and that pay was a little better, and so I went to work for old Bill Levy at the Heights Theater as an usher, and ushering was another monotonous job. It was a case where it involved with a flashlight to make sure people didn't stumble and fall when they walked down the aisle looking for a seat, and guide them to a seat and all that. Then after the show was going, after it played for a couple of days, you'd have to change the marquee outside for the next show that's coming up, and then put these preview pictures in the picture boxes outside, and so it was a case where the work went till from 7 to 10 o'clock, and it generally about 10 o'clock I'd go home, because I had to school the next morning, and so I would finish up. I think it was 7 to 10. I need my sleep. One of the guys that worked with me, Dewey Albro, he'd stay till midnight sometimes, I guess, in work. And how he could get by on such little sleep, I don't know, but he did. And so the fringe benefits about the working at the theater was that you meet a lot of people, and of course some of them involved girlfriends, and that got me in a jam a few times. At one time I had 4 girlfriends going at one time, and they were all there for Saturday night. Oh boy. It was kind of an embarrassing situation. I don't even remember how I come out of it, but I know that that didn't happen again. But the worst part of ushering in that theater was when old Bill Levy would have a group of his Jewish relatives show up, and of course I guess some of them really owned the theater, and I don't know how much he owned, but he ran it. And I from what I could figure, that some of these old Jewish people were the money behind it, because he sure treated them that way. And of course, when they came in, we had to jump and make room for these people, and make sure they get the seats anywhere they want them, and kick anybody else out that move them around, do it, whatever, but seat these people where they want to sit. And he was really sucking them up, and of course he treated us like crap during that time usually, but I put up with it a few times and never said anything, but finally it got to a point where he couldn't make up his mind on what he wanted on the marquee outside the building, and it's like 5 below zero, and it's late, and the wind is blowing, and we're up on a ladder and put up that marquee, and then he comes out, and that ain't right, we're going to change it, we got to put something else on. And after about the third time of that, I just go to hell. And I quit, and so that was the end of my job at the theater. Old Dewey Albro got fed up with him too, so anyway, a few months later, Dewey and I decided we'd check on the hiring up at the golf course, up in the Heights, the Hilltop, I guess it was called, Hilltop Golf Course, and they were hiring, and so we went up there, and he put us to work right away, and we were to be mowing greens. And the bad news was that they're hand push mowers, and so we managed to mow one green, and we were so dogged out that we stopped to rest for a while, and the old man was watching it with field glasses, and so he came shooting out on his Toro golf cart and said, "That's all, boys, you're done." So that was the amount of golf course work that we did, and I don't know where Dewey went, but I went on down to Sullivan's, and old Joe Sullivan hired me right away for working at the gas station. And so I started out there with mostly was greasing cars and waiting on customers and fixing tires. I learned how to fix tires. And man, I mean, in those days, in the early 40s, you couldn't buy new tires, and so everything had to be repaired, and so and it was, inner tubes and all of those, and so it was a matter of taking them apart and go and put them in a tank and check for the leak and clean them up and patch them and put them back together again, and do it without pinching a tube, or else you have another leak. And some of them old split rims are rusty and kind of tough to work with, but I learned a lot about tires, and we always seem to have about, even when I was working part-time, I'd get out of school and get down there, and then usually be anywhere from 3 to 7 tires waiting for me to fix, and along with waiting on the customers to put gasoline in the car and check their oil and radiator and battery, whatever they want to check, and clean the windshield. And it was busy days for full service stations. I guess working at Sullivan's was a real education in a lot of ways. I was around the average people. They aren't any rocket scientists in garages, but good people. And so I not only learned a lot about cars, but a lot about life. And it was a case where I started adding up money so that I could buy my own car, and of course keeping it going was very helpful to have a garage to work with, and so that was kind of neat. To start with, I didn't have a car, so living a couple blocks